Okay, so welcome everyone to this session of the Buddhist Winter School with Traleg Khandro as our teacher. I'll just tell you a little bit about this session and about Khandro-la before we get started, but also, of course, welcome. So a little bit about Khandro-la. Khandro-la is a long-time student and wife of the late Traleg Khandro Rinpoche, the ninth. Is also a director at EVAM Institute in Melbourne and the United States, and runs Shogun Publications, Traleg Rinpoche's publishing arm. Khandro-la studied Buddhism under Traleg Rinpoche's guidance for many years and has undertaken numerous long meditation retreats. Khandro-la has given commentary of Rinpoche's teachings in Australia, America, Europe, United Kingdom, and Southeast Asia. And at Rinpoche's request, Khandro-la also received traditional Lulong or Tibetan yoga training after qualifying as a Hatha yoga instructor. Khandro-la also has a degree in psychology. And today, Khandro-la's teaching will be on leading a fulfilling life, the art of becoming. So I will now hand over to Khandro-la. Thank you for being here, Khandro-la. Really appreciate it. And I'll mute my microphone now and we'll just enjoy ourselves from here on in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pema. It's lovely to be here with you all. And I think the winter school is a wonderful idea. So thank you for that initiative. I think let's just begin. So I can see some of you. Can you hear me well? You can hear me okay? Beautiful. All right, fantastic. So I'm just going to start, and Pema will be, if people have questions, by all means, and Pema will be managing that process. So I'm looking forward to any exchanges that we might have. Let me begin. The idea of becoming is something that's really often on my mind. As we know, one aspect of Buddhism is designed to illuminate, to relieve us of some of our suffering. And a large part of that is to understand our human condition. It's a very good starting point. And it's reasonable for us, even if we have the lofty dream of enlightenment, even if we hold that dream, it's so important for us to have a process of our spiritual journey that brings more fulfillment and happiness. It's not something that we have to wait for until some sort of long distance goal of enlightenment. It's something that we can work towards on a daily basis, and there should be a sense of progress and some sense of relief of our our condition of being a samsaric being. And so, whether the folks here, all of us, whether we're Buddhists or not, is really not of great concern for me in this talk. But I would like to make the distinction between religion and spirituality. While they can be intimately, there's an intimate integration of religion and spirituality often. I'd like to make the distinction in terms of the spiritual path as being a personal one, and that what we do on the cushion and in our reflections and our study, how honest we are with ourselves and how we manage our relationship with ourselves and the world and our own mind is a very personal one. And I think we can use all the help we can get, because our innate tendency is to be self-protective. But what we're being self-protective of can often reduce the quality of our life, or it can stop us from embracing the many aspects of ourselves. And so this is why I wanted to talk about becoming, because Buddhism doesn't emphasize where we've been. Buddhism emphasizes what we're becoming, how we're progressing. So whatever we are in the past, whatever we've done in the past, it's important for us to manage that, so that the past doesn't become the main obstacle to our happiness in the present and opportunities that come our way, both in the present and in the future. Of course, we have to take into account our capacities, the circumstances that we find ourselves in to some degree. But the goals that we set are important, and they help us to focus, and they help us to have purpose and meaning and have progression. And these things are important. And it's important not to let the past spoil our present. And that's a big ask, actually. That's a tremendously big ask, because we learn from our past. But if we have habitual tendencies of thinking poorly of ourselves because of something we've done that no longer exists, except perhaps in our faulty memories, then we can be, this is the aspect of suffering that we create. So we can also see in Buddhism, it talks about unavoidable suffering. It also talks about avoidable suffering. And the avoidable suffering is the suffering that we personally create. And we create that very much in the kinds of thoughts we have, the kind of relationship we have with those thoughts, how those thoughts infiltrate our mind, when they become obsessions, or when they become everything we are. When our thoughts and emotions and the mental manifestations in the mind become, from our perspective, everything that we are, then we're really limiting our potential, because we're far more. And I think from a spiritual perspective, anybody on a spiritual journey, I think one of the things that puts us on this journey is the belief that we're more than, there is more. There is more to be found. We are not living our fullest potential. And therefore, the very ordinary, mundane, everyday activity of the mind is the most immediate thing that we can work on to have a different life, a better life, a more open life, a freer life. And it's very easy to have even fairly transient thoughts that can undermine our happiness. So we can have sometimes thoughts that just are quite pervasive and intense and very difficult to overcome. But we can also have those sort of seemingly inane thoughts, like I'm having a bad day. That little thought can just quietly be tapping away and chipping away at our experience for the day. And at some point, a persistent attitude or a thought comes out in our behavior, it comes out in our actions. And so in terms of wanting to benefit others, wanting to be able to be helpful, wanting to be a good and kind person, simple things like the way we think and how we relate to things can be the key to unlocking greater potentiality. It can be the key to unburdening us of some resentments or some unforgivingness that we have towards ourselves or others. So our past can become entrenched. And I think all of us probably have examples of where we're unforgiving, whether it's of ourselves or somebody else. And it's tremendously challenging to not be governed by the past. But it's also to be able to overcome past guilt, to let unresolved feelings, regret, disappointment, some sense of failure, perhaps feeling unloved, and so on. The list is quite long if we want to keep going there. That we can actually put ourselves in a position where we have no respite. We have no respite from the past, even though it's gone. And reliving that can be it can be very painful and unreasonable. And sometimes we may have done something or said something that everybody else has forgotten, and the only person who carries the burden is ourselves. And our memories, as probably we're all aware, are faulty, not just if we're getting older, but just simply in looking at what we have been doing or things that happened in the past. You can, if you ask another person about that day, they will have a very, very different view and a very, very different story. And it's a while ago now, but when I was studying psychology, of course, we looked at memory as being something where you have moments in time that you have recalled and you create meaning. And so you create the story to give these pieces meaning. And so there's a degree of fabrication without wanting to be too hard on ourselves. It's a fairly reasonable thing to do. But there's a degree of fabrication in how we see our past. And so it comes back to what arises in the mind. What is arising in the mind at any given time? And why does a thought have an impact potentially on us? So I might just read actually a little piece from one of Traleg Khandro's books on how to do life. And he says, in Buddhism, the key to self-transformation, therefore, is in thought. If we were thinking in the right way, our capacity would increase. We would feel that we could do all we need to do because we would feel self-empowered. This is because we would have been thinking all the right things and thinking in the right fashion. If we think in the wrong way, like we ordinarily do, we know the consequences of that. In order to develop conviction in the efficacy of this self-empowering technique of the cultivation of positive thoughts, all that we need to do is pay attention to what is taking place in our mind now, with all the negativities going through our mind and the effect that these are having on us. If negative thoughts have that effect, why would the positive thoughts not have an effect on us as well? Buddhism says that the positive thoughts have more power and bear more fruit than the negative thoughts, emotions, and feelings. This is because once these things are generated, they will keep on flourishing, and to support this, there are things that we can think about to make them flourish even more. Therefore, in that way, when Buddhism speaks about the importance of thoughts, this means that thoughts have the capacity to transform us. Thoughts keep us imprisoned, but thoughts also have the capacity to free us. So when Rinpoche talks about the right thoughts and then wrong thoughts, arguably that's what he's saying. The beauty of the idea that we are more than our thoughts and our emotions and our feelings is that ultimately a thought is a creation. We create our thoughts, so we can uncreate them and we can change them. And in that respect, whether it's a bad thought or a good thought, it is transient and it is impermanent. And if we have the same sorts of thoughts over and over and again, they can develop a sense of permanency, seemingly. But we've had to generate something in order to sustain those thoughts. And so ultimately, a bad thought or a good thought have the same nature. They're created and they don't last without focus. So if we don't focus on them, if we don't fuel the thought and lead to further thoughts and conceptualization and so forth, they're going to dissipate. But it's not to say that thoughts are a bad thing. So good thoughts or bad thoughts have the same nature of being impermanent, transient, and we are the creators. We are the creators of our thoughts. So that puts us in a fantastic position to shift things. If we allow ourselves to recall and experience and remind ourselves that the most disturbing thoughts were created and can be uncreated. But to stop negative thoughts implies a focus. So it implies that we have selected a thought, decided it is bad, and that it's going to affect us, or it is affecting us, or we've recognized that there's some emotional instabilities coming up because of the potency of the negative thought. And so the idea that we're going to rip out all the bad thoughts so that only good ones are there actually puts a focus on the negative thoughts. So it's a far healthier approach to allow the negativity to arise, should it wish to, but that we don't give it too much oxygen. We don't feed it too much, give it too much focus. And so if we think about that, if we are able to detect the more positive thoughts and emotions, a more positive mind, when a negative thought drops into a positive mind, it's like dropping a flame into water. It doesn't have the necessary conditions to flourish. It just becomes benign. But if you throw a negative thought into a negative mind, a negative state that we can often get into or sometimes get into, then it's like dropping a flame into kindling. And depending on how many big logs and everything, how we've constructed the kindling and then the wood on top of it, we create a fire. It's inflamed. It's inflamed by the additional bad thought. And this sort of imagery can be extremely helpful. If we recognize that we dropped a negative thought into a situation, we can look at what effect it has. And sometimes looking at the effect can tell us really how buoyant our mind is at the time. And we have an opportunity to address that. So there's that underlying relationship that we can build with the insubstantial quality of what is arising in the mind and what we're focusing on in the mind. That good, bad, ugly, whatever that is that's arising in the mind, that it is it's arisen, it's created for whatever reason. There's sort of the right conditions, and it has arisen. And often the right conditions can simply be that the circumstances that we find ourselves are reminiscent of something that happened in the past. And then our very clever minds will go, okay, this is how you respond to this situation. And it comes up into the mind. So it's this kind of a situation that I really don't like, or whatever it might be. And so we have these knee jerks, we have this habituality. Is that a word? Habituation. Um, and we don't need to feel a victim to it. We have the opportunity to stand back and remember that we are not just our thoughts. We are not just the experience that we're having. There is more. From the spiritual perspective, it's a fairly underlying driving force, a belief that we are not experiencing and not expressing our full potential. And so that strongly suggests that what is in the mind that we see, which thought that we attach ourselves to or put more focus on, is just one small aspect of our current experience. And ironically, from a spiritual perspective, we can look into the mind, and we can sort of often come to quite a bit of agreement that a negative thought is likely to do damage to us more than a positive thought. But ironically, this kind of dichotomy that we develop when we're spiritually inclined, and any introspective sort of review can become quite a critical one, and we can become very tight with ourselves that I'm trying to progress on the path, and these thoughts and this mood that I'm in, or whatever it might be, is not helping. So the irony in being self-reflective and wanting to understand the human condition is that we can disturb our own confidence, and we can even undermine our own sense of self. And so from a Buddhist perspective, when we're looking into the mind, and of course we want to progress and we want to become better people, but the dichotomy between good and bad needs to be resolved, and the tendency to be critical of ourselves can be arrested. It can be, when I say arrested, just drawn back. There's a great deal of immediate sense of freedom and liberation in allowing the mind to be creative, whatever it might call up from our past, or images of possibilities for the future, whatever it is that we allow ourselves to be a creative, intelligent human being, because all this consciousness, all this creativity is what's known as, that the sort of, the fortunate human rebirth. We have our faculties, we have our intelligence, we are engaged with what's in the mind and what's out in the world and with other people. This is to be valued. And so in reviewing the human condition and wanting to understand it so that we can have a more joyous and happy life, so that we can be a better person for other people, we need to just watch out for that tendency to be very self-critical. So it's okay for our thoughts to arise. It's wonderful for our thoughts to arise. It helps us in every aspect of our life. But managing the mind is challenging, and understanding how the mind works is subtle. And so I think, one can reflect that one has made some very good choices in one's life, and that really sitting on a cushion and observing the mind without being overly reactive to it can provide us with a tremendous amount of insight and can be very enriching. And I'm sure that we've all had this experience where we are sitting with something that is disturbing and we accommodate it, we give it space, and we manage to not fuel it with other negative thoughts or other concerns or the intricate stories that we have told ourselves about why it exists in our psyche, that we have rested with it and we've accommodated it. And that level of tolerance and accommodation and not being excessively overly judgmental and sort of too hypervigilant in our responsiveness provides an opportunity for the spaciousness and for the experience to self-liberate, as it's often referred to. Just to allow ourselves to have a grubby, awful, nasty thought and let it self-liberate. We often talk about the illumination that can come, even the blissfulness that can come when we allow ourselves to be human, when we allow ourselves, our minds, to be brilliant and active and don't diminish ourselves because of that. And from a spiritual perspective, from any perspective, but from a spiritual perspective, if we've become almost too sort of a type of moralism, too moralistic about the creativity of the mind, we're just not giving ourselves a chance to relieve ourselves of suffering, to embrace joy and happiness and all these types of wonderful things in life. And it can also be like a false humility to always seek to see enlightenment as a long way off. And be cautious with how I'm saying this, because of course, enlightenment sort of probably is a long way off for most of us anyway. But speaking for myself at least, but that doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge that our life is becoming richer and more beautiful through our reflections, through our, through our study, our contemplations, through the verses and poetry that we can read, and so on. That contemplative aspect of ourselves as spiritual people, that contemplative approach to, reviewing ourselves in such a way that we can progress and improve, and perhaps, I don't know if you'd call it ironically, self-acceptance on the cushion, accepting what's arising without being overly judgmental, without being too hypervigilant, without being, categorizing things too tightly and sharply. You would think that suggests that we don't care. We could say, well, if we're just going to accept everything, how is one supposed to improve and progress on the path? Well, it's the beautiful qualities of tolerance and not being excessively judgmental, easing back on excessive moralistic sort of imposing unreasonably high expectations on oneself, so one doesn't have room to move. By giving space and not judging too tightly, instead of being extremely discriminating with what we allow what we're willing to accept in the mind. Instead of that, if we're able to ease up on our excessive discrimination and our dialogue about what's going on in the mind, we have an opportunity. To see ourselves more clearly. I think as Chogyam Trungpa talked about that nakedness, that naked awareness, where even our attractions and aversions to aspects of ourself, I like this part of myself, but I'm not too keen on that part, can distort how we see ourselves. We can have a very definite and defined idea of who we are and how people experience us. But I can assure you, I can assure myself, I can assure us that how we think we're perceived is not how we're perceived. How we feel that we're presenting in the world is not how we're being experienced by others. That meeting that we think that we've got this particular persona that we're comfortable with sharing with the world, or even a persona that tells us we're not comfortable with sharing ourselves very much at all with the world. That persona that we hold so tightly, this is me, this is my identity, this is how I am, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, these are the things that I hide, and people don't know about them. So this is how I'm presenting, and I can be totally convinced of that everybody here is going to be experiencing me differently. And no matter how much effort I put into that, I am not going to be successful. I might be a little bit successful. I'm not going to be successful. So I just bring up another point with that, and that is that about identity, that we can feel that we have an identity that is kind of clear to us, the kind of person we are and how we're perceived. But we all know of so many people in our lives, we all know that sometimes we're the last one to know about a quality that everybody else is having to deal with in us. You know, if we think of, I've heard people give me examples of at work, they had a boss who thought that the boss thought they were the most caring, kind, wonderful boss. This is the boss you'd want. And everybody else is having to manage this boss's moods, for example. The boss didn't know. Everybody else knew that boss had trouble with their moods, but that person didn't know. So all of us here, I'm guaranteeing you, all of us here display something that we don't know that we're displaying. You know, whether it's absent-mindedness, whether it's what can you say, arrogance, miserliness, whatever it might be, it doesn't mean that we know. Okay, so the identity that we have, and we want to have a healthy ego, a healthy sense of ourselves. Of course we do. You know, that's what we walk out into the world with. But it's the solidification of this is imaginative, and it's not how we are perceived. And it's just a really good thing to keep in mind that that the opportunity we have in the cushion is to, and I stress on the cushion, because we can't necessarily do this in everyday life, but on the cushion we arrest our judgment. We create a lot of accommodation to allow things to arise in the mind, so that one day we're sitting thinking that we're a very humble person and we have an experience of our arrogance. And we just rest with that. We don't get freaked out. We rest. We realize we thought we were generous, and we realize I'm actually very conditional with my generosity. There's only certain ways that I'm willing to be generous, and other ways I'm not. We may think of ourselves as very loving, and then we may realize that um, our love is very conditional, and on it goes. And we should, and this is the importance of the idea of becoming and progressing, is because it's better to know today that I'm not as generous as I thought I was. I'm far more arrogant than I thought I was. Or whatever it is that we discover about ourselves, is that we do not then create guilt and create too much of a drama around it, or condemn ourselves for it, because it is impermanent. It is a creation, and it may have been a habitual creation, but to see it for the first time is to change the relationship to ourselves, with ourselves. It provides us an opportunity to become more. The courage that we bring to the cushion is the opportunity to see that nakedness. Because if we can't see it, we can't work with it. If we can't work with it, there's not very much that we can do with it. And the thing about something that's kind of diminishing us is that these things don't stay static. They become embedded, or they can become like a little bit worse. You know, they can, the idea of progression, we want it to be forward moving. And if we can bring the courage of honesty to the cushion and allow the display of the mind to arise and fall, and sometimes this display comes and sits like a big brick of resentment, or a big brick of sadness, or even just a general sense of low self-esteem, or whatever it might be, things that we're familiar with, some more than others, you know. So there we sit, this feeling of low self-esteem. It's not going to engulf us. In essence, the feeling of low self-esteem has the same qualities as the feelings of joy, in that we've created it, and we can gently deconstruct it simply by not allowing it to take over. And this comes back to the idea of us being more than our thoughts, more than our experiences, our emotions, how we generally feel inside, the history that we are sometimes burdened with. So what more are we if our thoughts are transient and our emotions come and go? What more are we? And the opportunity to be undefined is a really beautiful aspect, I think, of the Buddhist tradition, and the aspect of allowing the mind to expand, allowing the mind to relax. And when we're able to really create a relaxed mind, we have the luxury of looking at how thoughts are generated, how our stability can be disturbed. We can look at how the mind works, how the human mind works, how the human condition is, how our suffering is created, how joy is created. We can have extraordinary opportunities. And so what I'd like to do is just to, if we can do a short meditation So I hope this is okay with everybody. The main thing about the meditation is that we have a straight back. If you can have a straight back, and however you like to have your eyes, they can be closed. I'd like to do a couple of meditations. This is just the first one. And so we would just want to relax for a few moments. And I'm going to give us some instructions. So we can relax for a few moments, and when you're feeling relaxed, when we manage to get that just sense of just letting things go a little bit, I want us to have a look at the space between our thoughts, or the space between our experience. So if a thought arises, we're wondering what's going to be happening in a little while, or something's concerning us, perhaps there's a noise in the background, wherever our mind might go, we allow that thought or that experience to be there in the mind, but we're looking for the space around the thought. Rather than focusing our attention on the activity of the mind, we're looking at the spaciousness. Let's just rest here just for about 3 or 4 minutes. Continue to look for the spaciousness outside of, around the thoughts. We may want to look at the spaciousness within the thoughts, arresting our judgment and accommodating. Thank you. I'd like us to do another meditation. And this is a meditation that it can be used in really any setting, actually. It's something that I find very relatable. And in this meditation, we won't do the whole meditation, just an aspect of it. In this meditation, we get a sense of our identity. And then we look at somebody that either we feel that we are better than, equal to, or less than. So we select a person and then we swap. In our meditation, we imagine that we are the person, and we ask ourselves to look for that person that we become to look at us. So if you understand what I mean. So what I would like us to do is we get a sense of ourselves, then we're going to choose somebody who we think, which should we choose, is better than. And we're going to become that person who is going to look at ourselves. So do you understand what I mean? Yeah, okay. Alrighty. So I'm going to talk us through this. And it'll just be for a few minutes. And here we're just looking at identity. Okay, very straight back. And we can, if you like, you can close the eyes, particularly if you want to get a sense of the imagery of the person that you're thinking of. So we see ourselves for a moment, how we see ourselves. And we think of the person that is better than us. We feel that they are better than us. And then we imagine that we are that person looking at ourselves. See what they see. Now you can stay with that experience, or we can move on to the next one of, I will do more than one. So we move on to the person that we feel we are equal to. And then we imagine that we become that person, and that person is looking at us. And then perhaps we will complete this meditation by thinking of somebody that we feel is less than us, is a lesser person than us. And then swap with them and let them see us. Then when you're ready, just for a few moments, just relax the mind and just observe the breath, whatever you want to do, just for a few more moments. this practice I found in an introduction to the Bodhisattva's way of life, I believe. And so I practice it from time to time in relation to challenging the solidification of identity. And I don't know what your experiences are, and I don't want to impose anything too much on your experience. But simply to say that the first time that I began to work with this meditation, I found that the person that I became never agreed with my self identity. When I found, and this is where the honesty and courage is important, when I realized that I thought somebody was less than me. Actually, maybe it's wonderful. The heartfelt response was that they didn't see that at all. And the person who I thought was much higher than me or better than me, it's almost like when I imagined myself as them, there were far more insecurities from their perspective, and perhaps they saw some qualities that I didn't see in myself that they admired, and these sorts of things, or that you see yourself as completely different. Like, when you see yourself through the eyes of the other person, something that you might think is predominant in your personality can't be seen even. So the reason I think these types of meditation practices can be really helpful and possibly powerful, is that we can become more, and we don't have to be stuck. Of course, we have certain strengths and weaknesses and certain capacities, but even our capacity, we know, can be very fluid. If we use the same sort of conviction that we have that we can become fit physically, and we go jogging, or we pump weights at the gym, or whatever it might be, we do that so that we become stronger and we become fitter. And working with the mind, and I know that can become quite mechanical and one thing and another, but one can have great success. It doesn't mean we're going to be an Olympic athlete. Some may hear, I'm definitely not one of those. But one can change one's physical capacity. It's the same with our emotional capacity, our ability for adaptability, equanimity. That our capacity, our identity, is undefined to a large degree. It's tremendously important that we provide ourselves with that opportunity not to be steadfast in how we see ourselves and how we see others. Because the world that we live in just is a far bigger mess that can be embraced, and us creating things that are definite and ordered and specific are going to be unraveling at different times in our lives. And it comes back to the idea really of not only equanimity but adaptability. I know in Buddhism there's a lot of talk about equanimity, of that sort of tremendous open stability. And in discussing the idea of equanimity, it's very interesting that often the idea of somebody being the same under all circumstances is what is meant by equanimity. But when we look into it, equanimity has far more to do with a freshness, bringing freshness to circumstances. It has far more to do with adaptability. And I often reference the idea of sight, eyesight. And when the eyes stop being able to adapt to the changes in light and, distance and so forth, if the eyes stopped adapting, we go blind. And so equanimity in Buddhism isn't about being the same. It's about the adaptation, about the flexibility, about not predetermining all our responses, providing the opportunity for there to be space around the thoughts, for there to be space around our responses to things, so that we can be renewed, we can be new in the experience. We don't have to be predetermined in our experiences. No matter how entrenched our habits are, we can change our relationship with the habit. It's again like getting rid of a habit is different to changing the relationship to a habit. Because if there's a good habit and it's supporting us, well, then that's wonderful. If there's a habit that we feel diminished by, getting rid of it can be challenging. But changing our relationship with it provides us with an opportunity to chip away at the thing that has become so solid, has become so predetermined. And this is where the idea of becoming more, progressing on the path, being flexible and fluid, not always responding in the same way to the same circumstances, provides so much opportunity for growth and joy and enjoyment in our lives. And not just for ourselves. If we give ourselves a break and become more open and responsive and accommodating and tolerant of what's in our own minds, that will automatically make a difference to how we walk in the world and how we respond to others. And it's okay for it, we just chip away. It's not that leaching out the hideousness of a certain aspect of ourselves and, dropping it away from ourselves so it's not there anymore. That just isn't how it works in the human condition. It's far better to accommodate and not allow a certain idea or aspect of ourselves that we find difficult to manage to become the only thing we can see. So it's that little bit of difference. It's not like pulling the weeds out, really. Not trying to get so fixated on something that we want to get rid of so that it becomes solid. We want to try and work more skillfully with the mind. Okay, I'm just going to read a little bit out of Rinpoche's book again, and then I'd like to see if there are any questions. I can rabbit on for a long time, but I would like to hear from you as well. So this is from the same book, How to Do Life, and it's about interdependency. Interdependency from a Buddhist perspective can be applied to the notion of how the mind works to create experience and how we apprehend the world. We've begun discussing the interrelationship between thoughts, concepts, beliefs, emotions, intentions, and motivations. There may be triggers, deeply held beliefs, and many thoughts and concepts that create the conditions for a particular emotional response to arise. There may be many other variables that also impact on our circumstances, such as environmental conditions. Some of our thought patterns can be repeated over and over again, entrenching our moral beliefs, opinions, etc. In Buddhism, whatever arises does so due to a myriad of causes and conditions, whether it is a personal experience or something that has manifested in the world. What arises will also disintegrate. There is inevitable and constant change. In all things, there are endless causes and conditions. Within this complexity, from a relationship perspective, being aware of the power of our mental and emotional activities to impact how we act towards ourselves and others, and how our emotions are used strategically, requires awareness and insight to see which behaviors benefit ourselves and others and which create harm. I think some of these paragraphs in this book really very concisely, I think, help us to look at what it is that we can work with kindly and skillfully in the mind, and what it is that can undermine our experience. The created suffering, the avoidable suffering is what's being focused on here, so that we can have a more beautiful, meaningful, a kinder life. And then the person that we want to be has a way of arising. Rather than us fighting for it or diminishing ourselves in order to try and create a humility because enlightenment's still a long way away, we have an opportunity to become the person, more like the person that we want to be. It's very likely that that manifestation might be quite different. And the epiphanies that we have might be absolutely unexpected. But, openness and flexibility gives a real confidence. A confidence that has a real sense of humanity, a kindness that when we've expressed it well with ourselves, it naturally flows, that we'll be expressing it to others, all sentient beings. I'm happy to have a discussion. I have another meditation that I would like to do, and there's got more to say. So if you have any questions, please feel free.
Would you prefer people to put the questions through the chat, Khandro-la, or to just speak? What would you like to do?
Oh yeah, I'm happy with either actually. If I go into the chat, there's probably questions there already.
I'm having a look in there now. There's just positive comments so far. Do you want to have a look and see if you want to respond to them? I had a question.
Yes.
Can you show us the cover of the book?
Oh, yes.
Rinpoche's book.
Yes. There we are. It's called How to Do Life. And what we did was gather, because often there's a lot of technical terms with a lot of Dharma books and so forth. And these were spontaneous teachings that Rinpoche gave, sometimes to small groups of people that we collected. And he talks about relationships, emotions, love, and it's a very accessible book. So How to Do Life is a bit of a funny title, I guess. It's a very profound book. It's very accessible. There's there's no particular, very little jargon in there, if you like, for want of, that's not a very nice word, but it's not full of terms that we need to unwrap.
Excuse me, sorry for coughing. All right, I liked the two sections that you read. They were really powerful. So did you want to do another meditation and then have questions, or did you want to chat a bit now and then do a meditation? What was your preference, Khandro-la?
That's a very, yeah. Yes, let's do another meditation, because I think there's some there would be there's a discussion in one of those comments. I appreciate your comments tremendously. Okay, this is quite different, and this to the other meditations that we've done. With this meditation, we're really looking at here how we can change the environment, our inner environment, how pliable our inner environment can be. And so I'll talk us through first, and then I'll lead us through. So in this meditation, we're looking at having an experience of certain environmental things, and how that using our imagination, experiential imagination, can change our inner environment, whatever our environment happens to be. So the first one, and I'll just talk it through first of all. The first one is that we imagine that we're like a mountain. We're stable, and even if there are strong winds, that there's a stability and a strength and a power. And we just rest in having a sense of the mountain. And it doesn't mean that there won't be gusts or different things happening, but we have a sense of the mountain. And then we go on and we imagine that we are like the depths of the ocean. That no matter how massive the waves might become at the surface, that we have a stillness and a depth that is somewhat impenetrable. And we stay with that for a little while. And then we move on to the sky. That the mind can be as expansive as the sky, the blue sky. And no matter how many clouds form to stop us from seemingly seeing the sky is unaffected and expansive. And we rest in that sense of the expansiveness of and the spaciousness and the unendingness of the blue sky. And the clouds don't penetrate the blue. They may obscure the blue, like the thoughts can obscure our true nature, but they don't affect the sky. So we're just going to go through those three. So I'll say a few words and then just do a light bell as we move on to the next. So we're going to go through these three. And so let's just begin by resting the mind for a few moments. I'm going to rest like a mountain, stable, strong, powerful. And we continue to experience that steadiness and strength of the mountain as we begin to experience the stillness and depth of the ocean. No matter whether the ocean is still or turbulent, the stillness and the depth remains. While maintaining the strength and stability of the mountain and the depth and stillness of the ocean. We develop a sense of the expansiveness of the blue sky. That no matter what might obstruct the view of the blue sky, the clouds do not affect the blue sky. It remains vivid, expansive. Like the mind. Stable as the mountain. as deep as the ocean, as still as the ocean, and expansive as the sky. You can just rest in the experience that we've generated in our meditation just for a few moments. Thank you. So in a way, and I hope the experiences that you generated then were beautiful for you, and that there's some change in how you were feeling before to how you were perhaps feeling now. And that's the power of thought. That's the power of our imagination. And so, really, from a meditator's perspective, it's very hard to convince ourselves that the condition of our mind it can't be changed, because we can experience that in a simple meditation that we do together here online. Whatever the outcome is, whether it's, as people have said, whether it's humility, strength, whether we came with one feeling and generated something more uplifting, then it means that the power to manage the beauty of our own mind is in our hands. And then it's a matter of how much skill that we can develop. And one thing that I often say is, you know, if you have a good meditation manual or if you have good instructions by wonderful teachers, keep them close. Because as samsaric beings, we sure know how to go off track. And you know, we're very expert at that. And so I always, personally, and I'm guessing many of us here are the same, we keep the teacher's instructions close by. So that when we're in meditation, you know, we have some kind of a goal. Even if the goal is just to be lighter, happier, less fixated. These are tremendous spiritual goals to have, because it just opens up so much possibility for us, you know. So in that sense, it's good to have some doubt in who we think we might be, and have some confidence in what we can become. You know, that unknown. It's really worth challenging some of the things that we feel are so certain about ourselves. So thank you for these comments, and I think I might just go through this comment. I just have, is it Shazby? We found the meditation challenging when we were looking at the different kinds of people. I can see exactly what you're saying. It's not always easy to have a clean idea of somebody who's better than, less than, and equal to. And so I don't want to enforce that on anybody. It's a meditation practice that I found was helpful in making my sense of self so definite and so certain. I could let you know a couple of things that I've done with this meditation. One is that the person that I felt was better than me, higher than me, was I saw the Dalai Lama. And so I imagined that it was the Dalai Lama looking at me, and I was unrecognizable, is what I would say. My immediate mind conjured, whatever my mind conjured up, they were unrecognizable. I was completely different to how I think I am. All I know is that I became very undefined. And when I tried to choose somebody lesser than me, that was very painful, because sometimes somebody comes to mind. And it's very painful to stay there. But the beauty is that if we do find somebody that, because what happens is that we think, well, no, they're not lesser. But when we're doing the practice, what the beauty is if we had an idea of somebody being less than us, that's not how they see it. Do you see the interchange? That it's so fluid. The person we might think is less than us, when we switch sides using our imagination, they may experience us as equals, or they may experience us as lesser. The idea is not to focus on the immorality of all the judgments we put on ourselves in relation to others, how we compare ourselves constantly, and it's so one-dimensional. It's not to focus on that error, but to shake up the idea of our identity being so fixed. So I really appreciate it. And the thing about meditation instructions is that some of them we're going to be attracted to, it's going to be very helpful, and others aren't. So if that's not resonating with you, sorry, Pema, yeah, just leave it.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I was just putting my hand up like a good boy. I wanted to ask a question about that, if I could, before you moved on to the other comments, if you were going to do that. So for me, that meditation is familiar to me, obviously, from Shantideva. And I think those of us who've been on the path a little while, even just a few years, we have trained ourselves to not think about others as superior, neutral, or lesser than. And it's almost like, and sometimes that's very legitimate and sincere. We don't see people that way, but sometimes it's something that we've pasted on top of what we really feel, you know. So what's helped me is I think about superior in terms of a specific thing. So I also use Holiness Dalai Lama in that one. So I was thinking about specifically in terms of compassion. So I saw Holiness Dalai Lama as a superior being, my sister as the neutral being, because my sister's, I think in the same place as me, compassion-wise, and I probably won't name the lesser than person, but public figure, political figure.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. You know where we're going?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I find that it's helpful to choose a specific space in which that's happening and then see how they see you. And I totally agree. Like, you don't recognize yourself, even when you choose someone familiar. Like I chose my sister as the neutral person, like where I feel we're on a similar level. Still, I felt like she was seeing things that I felt I had kind of put a lid on from our childhood or whatever. So I think it's a really powerful kind of thing to undo our fabrication of who we are. It's unsettling for sure, but I think it's powerful, definitely.
Okay. Yes, 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 and I think you're absolutely right, Pema. It is unsettling, and it's perhaps an unfair, powerful meditation to bring in for such a short time.
Mm,
But it really is not to um, well, it's not problematic to be a little unsettled. If our identities become a little fixed and we've felt it's become a little undefined, that that's a beautiful thing to work with. We've given ourselves a bit of freedom. Uh, the thing also is that if we've got a definite uh, sort of feel for our identity and who we are, and that gets rattled a little bit, we want to just really make sure we rest with that. Because there is a lot of things in life that cause us identity crisis. It can be something like, um, the loss of a partner, the loss of a job, a change in our economic um, capacity, whatever it might be. There's a lot of things that challenge us. So that fluidity, that uncertainty can be used to our advantage, to have that softness. And I think, Pema, your approach to choosing a particular type, was just, to look at the aspect of compassion. And I have to say, I know when I've chosen, and a public figure, it is very helpful to choose them, because immediately you see this public figure as, as you were talking about, having less compassion than you. But then when you switch it around and see them looking at you, it, sometimes the measure isn't going to keep being compassion. It might be that they see you as I mean, if when I use that for myself, the lesser person can also see me as a complete idiot, like
mm,
really, like really not understanding what's important in the world, or not really
yeah.
not understanding, so but anyway, I guess that's a digression really, now that I've
Now that was kind of my question. Is it okay to do that? And my lesser person saw me as quite arrogant for judging them.
right, yes, yes,
So I was like, oh, I'm not compassionate at all. I'm judging that person. So it's really, I think it's a fantastic thing. I think, but it also, as with everything, I think there's some more comments there for you, Khandro-la. I think as with everything, apply with care.
yes, yes, apply with care, absolutely. So yes, if anything rocks your world too much, stability is very important to all of us. And it's managing the mind. This is, our greatest asset, and it's a very interesting, complex thing that we, interestingly, through our lives, one of the things we try and do is get to know ourselves better. So we're strangers to ourselves, let alone anybody else. We don't know ourselves very well necessarily. And so we never want to um, overuse our meditation or lose our ground. Our ordinary life and our spiritual life should be feeding, the two are interconnected, and one should be feeding the other. It's not like parallel play. It's not like I go to work and then I get to do my meditation at home, because there's nothing spiritual about work. And it's not going to work for us. We need to bring our hearts, that we open, and, you know, build an understanding of the human condition, and feel for other sentient beings to work too. If we're a musician, that's a spiritual thing. It comes onto the path. We don't need to be segmented because we're spiritual. It's what we do on the cushion that flows into our everyday life. So the cushion is a different place to everyday life, but it is, there are not the overt distractions. They're all the inner distractions. But how we work on the cushion feeds our life. And if we work carefully and gently and kindly and allow ourselves to be a human being, to have foibles and to have whatever, whatever comes up in the mind can be accommodated, and it doesn't have to make us feel bad if we have an awful thought. And we all have absolutely revolting thoughts from time to time, at the very least. And that if we condemn ourselves for them, then it's very hard to have a happier life. But that I feel like I've gone over time.
No, that's okay. I think there's actually a comment here. I think it would be really great for you to respond to, Khandro, if you could, from Robin, who felt that meditation, the one with the switching of people, highlighted the negativities that she saw in herself, which has been historically for me something that has happened quite often. So I think it'd be good if you could, just speak to that for a little bit, and then we'll close it up, wind up.
Okay. Look, it won't sound like I'm really addressing that question immediately, but I will. I had instructions from different teachers from time to time on this, and this is really important for keeping us on track. And that is that we work with what arises in the mind. We don't try and go down deep and pull something out at the root, because when we try and go down deep and pull something out at the root, what we're requiring ourselves to do is create a story of how something has manifested. And this becomes a different psychological process than what is recommended in Buddhism, from my understanding. So whatever arises in the mind, that's what we work with, because everything else is going to have an aspect of narrative and storytelling to it if we decide we have to go down deep. There's another thing I'm going to bring up about the human condition, is that we learn through mimic. And some of the things that we may attribute some deep roots to, or even some trauma to, I'm not saying always, trauma is a real thing, I'm not denying that, but there are times when our behavior is a result of mimic. We have learned a behavior through our families, work colleagues, and so on and so forth, and they may not have the deep roots that we're attributing to them. And so if we work with what arises in the mind, we are working with what we can experience today. And everything else can be imbued with a particular type of prejudice, possibly some, there all kinds of things can come into it. I don't want to list everything, but I want to leave that with you. But let me have a look at this. Yes, okay. So Pauline and Robin, this is really lovely. Pauline is saying, I put my own mother in both the higher and the lesser than, and it was extremely interesting. And Robin said that she didn't have a particular person. And so this is, I think, Pema, what you're talking about is caution. So, you want to be able, and obviously the people, Pauline and Robin, have been, it's an interesting discussion for them. You want to be able to manage what you're going to be working with in the mind. And so the wonderful thing about what Pauline is saying is that is often how we relate to people, that there are some aspects of them that we think, wow, I wish I was more like them. And then there are other aspects where we think, well, I think I'm doing better than them. We're always comparing ourselves with others, and hopefully we can work on, if that's really problematic for us, we can work on that. And then Robin was not to pick somebody in particular, just a general sense. And I think that is equally fine. So I don't want to preempt how you do it. As it happened, interestingly, both Pema and I chose His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And Pema, you chose your sister. I chose one of the board members at EVA. That we seem to have a fantastic communication. And yet I felt she saw me very different to myself. So really what it is to question if our identity, that the identity that we are very invested in within ourselves, has a level of accuracy and the level of determination that we attribute to it. So really that's all. And to have these interesting comments coming up, you know, is wonderful. And if you don't relate, again, what I was saying before, if you don't relate to any practice that we may have done, put that aside, and we do practice that we relate to better, and we feel is more helpful. And caution is always important. Sometimes, you know, that's why we don't want to open Pandora's box on some of the things that may be extraordinarily painful and everything. We just work with what's arising. We always just work with what's arising. We don't have to, it's not a Western psychological investigation, this, you know, Buddhist meditation. It is different. I'm not saying anything against Western psychology, but it's we're looking at a different process here, of you know, allowing for the fluidity, allowing positivism, allowing newness and growth, and so on and so forth. It's different. Probably, I'll just say one more thing, Pema. I'm so sorry I'm going over time. Oh, goodness gracious, I've gone over time a lot too. Is I think cognitive behavioral therapy, very similar in some respects to the Buddhist approach of looking at the power of thoughts to diminish one's life and shifting those thoughts to uplift oneself. So I certainly am not wanting to say anything against Western psychology, but I think it's worthwhile making the distinction. And it could lead to another discussion, but we're out of time.
Thanks, Khandro-la.
Thank you all so very much for participating and sticking around. And Pema, thank you so much for this initiative and bringing such wonderful people for me to be able to speak with, and some of the teachers. I haven't had a chance to see all the teachers as yet, but what I'm doing my best to participate as much as possible, and
it's all recorded, so you won't miss anything.
Wonderful speakers. So thank you all very much.
And I want to thank you, Khandro-la, for your input, contribution, wisdom to this process, which I really appreciate. So I want to really quickly, when you raised CBT at the end, what I was thinking throughout was like, this is Dzogchen CBT. Like throughout, that's what I was thinking. It was like a better version of CBT, a sort of more gentle, self-directed version of that. So I really think this is great. I had a really great time. Really appreciate you sharing that with us, and I appreciate everyone who is here. Really appreciate your presence as well. Thank you very much. We have another session at 7 p.m. and I see that Jumper, who's leading that session, is right there. So we'll go have lovely dinner now, everyone. Yay, yummy. And then some of you will see at 7, some of you will hope to see tomorrow. And Khandro-la, I really hope that we can catch up at some point, talk about books, whatever you like.
I would love to. I would love to.
Really think that we have some stuff in common around the book space. Anyway, okay, thanks everyone. Thank you very much for your time. Have a lovely night.